Hello, I'm Dan Winter, back with you, fractalfield.com, fractalu.com. It's first thing in January 2021, and we're covered with beautiful snow here in South France. And we're doing this amazing new film series with our wonderful filmmaking partner, Ari, from Netherlands and Belgium.
My name is Ari. I'm a teacher of Qigong, yoga, meditation. I'm also an interdisciplinary artist, making music, dance music. I have my own form of movement and dance called reconnective dance, and you can find this if you follow the links in the description. And yeah, we're gonna have some fun here and explore the science of Kundalini with Dan Winter. And I'm very grateful to also show some practical examples of how you can experience the different experiences that we were talking about with Dan and the information, so that you can have a practical example of how to integrate these into your daily life, hopefully.
So, with that, are we ready to begin?
Yes.
Okay.
Ready to go.
So here's what we want to do in this part of the series. Today we're going to talk about the scientific understanding, the biological mechanics of Kundalini in some detail, and then we're going to parallel that more in another film with the personal experience and the hygiene of Kundalini. So this section is really about the science. And actually we have this little outline here, Kundalini Science and Practice. So actually, how we begin this is to understand the essential relationship between the spin of charge and spin density of charge, which you might call a cloud of plasma, and information itself. How that the very nature of metabolic density, charge density, metabolic speed, eventually actually creates a kind of awareness. The concept of the origin of charge and charge rotation or spin, it's a pretty deep question in the sense that those of us who think in unified field terms consider the unified field as a single contiguous compressible media which behaves as a superfluid. And the compression and rarefaction in that superfluid, in my view, is precisely what we call plus and minus charge. So actually that simple compressibility, which Tesla called compression tension, and that was his name for voltage, is actually what charge is. And then charge rotation is the only origin of both mass and time. The spin, when that charge rotates, it stores inertia, the only origin and definition of mass. And the charge rotation has a period, the only definition and origin of time. So charge rotation is fundamental and primal to the unified field theory. And if you can say what charge is, it's pretty hard because you can't say what it isn't. Everything. Kundalini is often experienced as your metabolism is kind of racing. It's a bit of a lightning bolt. And it's true, there's a relationship to that intense charge density and awareness density. So we use it often as an example for that, where you see ball lightning is a plasma toroid, and you are a plasma toroid, and ball lightning is famous for responding to telepathy, that at the center of the torus, as it were, the vortex point where many paths and errands meet, I mean, where the waves converge, you have the place, if that convergence point is centripetal, there is a sorting phenomena that happens where the inertia, which is centripetal there, causes the kind of compression that sorts for which waves can emerge into phase. And that is quintessentially related to the process of perception itself. For example, the young kids we're teaching to see without their eyes, they get that harmonic cascade in their brain waves. It's kind of implosive. It looks like a caduceus from alpha to gamma frequencies. And then they're very clear. It's like, they say, it's like I'm looking through a vortex inside my head. So there's the kid, and they're actually, they're seeing like through a tube in their head. And we know why. It's because it's the vortex of charge itself which produces perception. And that's an introduction to the phase conjugate nature of perception itself. So that's why at the compression point at the center of toroidal ball lightning, you have the beginnings of self-awareness, because that non-destructive self-reentry is ability to self-refer, the definition of consciousness itself, con with shus, turning inside out ness, you see. So with turning inside out ness, consciousness, that ability to re-enter non-destructively, and that's non-destructive compression, produces awareness, which is where all the waves converge centripetally. And we also know that, as Tiller and others measured many times, that focused human attention causes charge fields, electric fields, to compress. So electrically, measurably, human attention is centripetal. It's implosive. So now let's move that back to the experience of Kundalini and the science. So when metabolism becomes spin dense, the possibility of greater awareness occurs. So all this business about the harmonics of the breath and the harmonics of the brain and the harmonics of the spine liquid pump we're going to talk about, it's all oriented around this issue: is how can that series of harmonics converge implosively, non-destructively, into one, as it were, lightning bolt up your tailbone, which is intense awareness, which will increase the ringing in your ear, the voices of ancestors, all the fun little cities that go with Kundalini. So in the beginning, it's simply a matter of non-destructively compressing metabolic density. That's kind of the philosophy. So this charge density is the beginning of awareness and life force itself. You know, the many stories of near-death experience related to lightning, as in Daniel Brinkley's several books on near-death, that it was after a lightning experience that he woke up. After his near-death experience due to lightning, he woke up, and everyone he touched, he got flashes of their whole lifetime of emotion, because his DNA had imploded in that braiding helical superconductor of lightning itself. And so his DNA actually became a superconductor. And that's actually been measured, that a monofilament thread of DNA or gold, when you zap it with modest amperage, during the moment of crystallization, will become electrically measurably a superconductor. So it's a wire that becomes superconductive. And so the movie Powder is another example of somebody who had a lightning experience and then, the intense awareness. Or there's a famous story of Nikola Tesla himself, that he had a very high voltage shock one day, which it was a near-death experience. It almost killed him. And yet, it was a turning point in his life, because so much awareness converged when the charge became that dense and compressive. So you can think, if you can handle a lightning bolt up your tailbone, you might become aware, if it doesn't kill you. And in fact, Kundalini can be dangerous. It is in fact powerful, and there are, as they say, many forms of schizophrenia that are often diagnosed as Kundalini, until people can be stable enough and grounded enough to have the context to withstand that much information density and keep it in context. So, metabolism density is information density. We're talking about what happens inside the body during Kundalini, and we're talking about how when wavelengths converge and the harmonics cascade, implode, that becomes spin density and awareness density. And the most important frequency molecularly in the living cell, adenosine diphosphate, ADP, has a wavelength we're talking about. The bond length there is about 1.93 angstroms, which turns out to be part of the equation, my invention, called origin of biologic negentropy, where if you take the Planck length and time, the musical key signature of every wave in physics, and multiply by just whole number exponents powers of golden mean ratio, you get a harmonic cascade that predicts planetary orbitals, human dynamics, hydrogen radii, all of the parts of nature that become self-organizing, because that's an implosive caduceus, the fountain of life, as it were. So that particular equation, origin of negative entropy, also happens to predict most of the harmonics we're going to be talking about today, including, starting with the short one, the wavelength of adenosine diphosphate, ATP, 1.91 angstroms, 1.93. Point being that when we did this work with Bob Dratch, where we were scanning the spine for Kundalini, for metabolic density, for inner fire, you scan for that wavelength in the microwave emissions scanning technology with Bob Dratch. Indeed, you could make a map of metabolic density of the spine based on that key frequency, because it's literally metabolic fire. In a sense, in biophysics, if you understood that the cell, because ADP, ATP, is used for every major energy transaction in cellular metabolism. And remember, we're talking about cellular fire. Where do you store the blue fire, the ultraviolet, the coherent light in the cell? Every time you have energy to store and retrieve inside the cell, you do this little tip-top teeter-totter up and down between ADP, adenosine diphosphate, and ATP, adenosine triphosphate. And so that's a quantum distance. It's a step. It's never less or more. It's exactly the same step. So if you measure the emission that comes from step up, step down, step up, battery charge, battery discharge, charge, discharge, that distance, how much, it's like going to a bank and measuring how many dollar bills have changed hands that day to measure economic fire in a country, economic density, economic activity. So in the cell, the economic activity that's the dollar bill of cell metabolism. So that's why you can scan and measure Kundalini in the microwave. It's pretty cool. Well, it turns out that frequency then fits all these other frequencies we next need to talk about in terms of how this flame builds up inside the body. So we started with a short wave there. Now let's move to a longer wave. Here, if you see in this graphics, this is the heart rate variability, the graph of the harmonics of HRV, heart rate variability. Remember, heart rate variability, the low frequencies of the heart's ringing, the heart's beat, are the most studied subject in all of medicine because it's so predictive of every disease. So the low frequency harmonics in your heart are the fastest way a doctor can determine if you have an immune system or not, if they're ordered. And in that study, it's been concluded that the most important frequencies of the heart rate variability are what's called the LF and HF component, low frequency, high frequency component. And it turns out the LF component of heart rate variability, the most important frequency of which also turns out to be the most important frequency of your breath, 0.1 hertz, also is, at the same time, the most important frequency of your blood pressure. It's called the Mayer wave, 0.1 hertz. So if you check the natural resonant frequency of the liquids of your spine, of your blood pressure, and anybody who studied heart rate variability knows this, when your blood pressure is relaxed, it's resonating at 0.1 hertz every 10 seconds, okay? And so that's the blood pressure key frequency, the heart rate variability key frequency, and the breath key frequency, 0.1 hertz. So if you want to motorize, this is an introduction to how we motorize the Kundalini with breath training, how any yogi knows they control their Kundalini with breathing training. In our app, iThrive, ithrve.com, we teach that it's called the Mayer wave breath, basically 5 seconds in, 5 seconds out. And you have this ability to make then a 10-second breathing wave. And the beauty is that it's measurable every time. If you breathe at 0.1 hertz, your heart rate variability graph, your heart rate, will follow your breath. So that's the weird way of controlling heart rate. And your breath-entrained heart rate is the drummer that's controlling your spine liquid pump. And your spine liquid pump is the burning fountain of Kundalini. And that's why, as we've said many times, and that leads up to our next subject, that if that spine liquid pump is pumping, it is then clinically impossible to be depressed. That's putting it a bit negatively. Actually, in a more positive sense, if that burning fountain is pumping, that is the wave mechanic of bliss, and we're going to talk literally about a burning fountain right here in a few minutes that emerges from that liquid going up your spine liquid pump. And that original work on sacrocranial was done by Upledger, the Upledger School of Sacrocranial in Florida, and it's taught around the world. We taught with the Italian teachers in Iceland this science of sacrocranial. So what I learned in studying the sacrocranial is right here in this next graph. This is important. This is the caduceus of the spine liquid pump. Remember, this is the core scientific wave mechanic motor of Kundalini, these spine liquid harmonics. These are called the tidal frequencies. And remember how the sacrocranial practitioners measure this. They touch the fascia on any part of the body, and by tuning in and getting their attention very focused and entrained with who they're touching, and when their attention goes into the body of the person they're touching, the patient, their attention itself added to the patient's aura will increase the coherence of the sacrocranial pump in the patient. And as the sacrocranial pump emerges from disorder into order, that's the core principle of all the sacrocranial healing therapies. Remember when we did this with Marisol in Spain for so many years? She'd have 5 or 7 therapists touching one child with powerful learning problems, and by having these therapists just touching their spine, their sacrocranial fluid, feeling the frequencies, the low frequencies of the fascia liquids pumping, and they'd feel those frequencies. The result would be that the collected attention of all those healers focused by touch into one child's body at once. There was miraculous healing. And they can tell when the healing is happening because suddenly the spine liquid pump harmonics go from disorder to order because of that implosion of centripetal attention, in this case, gathered attention. So, looking at what those harmonics are, and remember this has been extensively studied, there are many thousands of wonderful sacrocranial healer professionals. So these harmonics in the spine liquid pump are well studied. Now the point we're about to make here is that it turns out that the key harmonics of the spine liquid pump, called the tidals, it turns out, I proved newly, actually again correspond to my equation, this caduceus of golden ratio harmonics tuned precisely to Planck. So here they are in this little graph. The actual known sacrocranial frequencies are here in green, so they're called the tidal. The long tidal is 0.01 hertz. The mid tidal is 2.5 cycles per minute, or 0.041 hertz. And then the next one is 0.1 hertz, that's the Mayer wave. And then the higher frequency one here is called a base nominal tidal sacrocranial. It's 8 to 10 cycles per minute. The point I wish to make here is now if you look in red down below, these are the harmonics predicted by my equation. For example, if you take my equation, Planck times powers of exact integer powers of golden ratio, you get 0.0959 hertz, almost exactly 1 hertz. So this whole cascade in green here, the known scientific measured harmonics of the spine liquid pump mechanism, and compare that to my equation, origin of negentropy, you get almost an exact match. So we now know the spine liquid pump is doing you this service by harmonically cascading and making this implosion work. From the high frequency of the ATP to the low frequency of the spine liquid pump, which overlap perfectly the heart rate variability LF component. Now, just to mention in passing, we're going to talk about this. My teacher for this work is Bentov. Oh yes, here we have the Bentov slide. Let's look at this. So my teacher originally, Ben Bentov, Itzhak Bentov, author of Stalking the Wild Pendulum and the Cosmic Comic Book. I worked in his lab. You know, we visited many times. We had a lot of fun together. And we did many of the physics of consciousness symposia together. Actually, Elizabeth Rauscher went to his place with me. I mean, it's very colorful. I guess you could say I was the Forrest Gump of that generation working on the physics of consciousness. But anyway, what Bentov measured, and I was there actually, he used, and this what this graphic here is on the bottom, this is called a capacitive accelerometer. And in this case, he's using the plates of a capacitor, which is simply a metal plate above your head and one below your seat in a chair. And your body is then the dielectric insulator in that capacitor. And then if you put that inside a tuned circuit, you can measure micromotion in the body. It's micromotion entrainment is the name of this process. So with that device, as you're sitting there very, very still, your heartbeat shows up in the accelerometer. Accelerometer just measures how much your heartbeat causes your tailbone to push down into your chair. That's a pretty sensitive accelerometer, isn't it? So there I'm sitting totally still in a chair, and I'm measuring how much my heartbeat is thrusting me into the bottom of my chair. That's a sensitive device. And using that sensitive device, he could measure, and this is the actual graph here, the heartbeat here are these short peaks, and the long waves here are the heart sounds. So he's actually showing the ejection points of the heart. And what he measured there was the fact, and that's shown in the graphic at the left, that during relaxation, the largest blood vessel, the main aorta of your body, from your heart down to the aortic crotch, becomes a standing wave, a violin string, that is thus becoming more efficient because of natural resonance entrainment with other body harmonics. You see, this is the point, that in order for your body to become spin dense, charge dense, metabolic dense, and therefore information dense, all of the harmonics have to fit together. It's that simple. And the sexy word for this in physics these days is entanglement. But actually this describes what is also identical with perfect embeddability. And it turns out that the concept of golden ratio harmonics adding and multiplying, named conjugation. So when these waves conjugate, so perfect golden ratio fractal phase conjugation is the definition of perfected embeddability, perfected entanglement. You know how they talk about you have these wormholes to the other side of the universe because of entanglement. Well, what they mean perfected is precisely what phase conjugation is. And later we'll get to how the projected longitudinal EMF is what goes through the wormhole because it goes faster than light. But let's stay with this concept of the harmonics of the spine going to the brain. So now Bentoff measured next that this would then entrain the liquids of the ventricle horns of the brain. And that's the top part of this slide right here. So you see the liquid of your brain is bouncing back and forth and imploding on the center pineal. And this is the ringing in the ears. So what we did with Bentoff was he took a large number of meditators, and they were hearing a ringing in their ears, which I often do. And remember, achophenia, the ringing in your ears, is not always pathology. It can be your ancestors making a phone call. It's called Sangreal, song in the blood, the sound current that you ride to heaven. And whether it's pain or bliss depends in part on how you interpret it, actually, on how you relax. Because perfected relaxation is the perfecting of charge density. Because relaxation in this sense is generally identical with increased conductivity. And increased conductivity is a result of increased order, and increased order, perfected, is this golden ratio implosion. Remember that harmonics in octaves, powers of 2, actually make maximum destructive interference. You'll see that at our fractalfield.com/mathematics of fusion article. Whereas harmonics in golden ratio make maximum constructive interference. And that is the solution to compression, and that is the solution to implosion and negentropy and non-destructive self-reentry, and therefore awareness. So, Bentoff mapped these frequencies ringing in the ventricle horns, and the ventricle horns, like a phonon wave, will become ordered. And so the liquids in the ventricle horn will become more crystalline. And because the phonon standing wave in there, and this is why you see the horny horns of Lucifer or Moses, it's indicating the completion of the Kundalini phonon toroid, which has crystallized the phonon liquids, but it has liquefied the the brain matter, and the gray matter, and the result is there's an equilibration of the wave propagation velocity from the liquid of the brain matter, which became more crystalline, and the liquid of the ventricle horn became more crystal. And so when that equalizes, the whole cavity of the brain becomes a coherent phonon implosive resonator. And we're going to look at what that means. The next part on this slide is how when you say that you feel like there's a bolt of lightning going up your tailbone, and I've felt it many times, and then a bolt of lightning coming out the top of your head. It feels like a burning fountain. You can feel the negative ions. This is kind of fun. That actually, at one level, if you take a look, and that's what's at the top right here, called the homunculus, the map of where the nerves of your body are mapped onto your brain. For example, where your hand, which the wires from the nerves in your hand occupy a relatively huge space on the homunculus, the little man map on the surface of the brain, that if you track the toroid of the ringing bell on the surface of your brain, that you see that the parts of your body that you think you're feeling a lightning bolt going through your tailbone and here and then actually is a map of a current traveling across the folded surface of the homunculus in sequence, and you can actually see which parts of your body are going to feel that. So is it all in your head, or is it all well, it's both, but that's the mirroring, that's the fractal relationship. And so Bentov mapped and worked on that current, toroidal magnetic current electrifying the homunculus layers in sequence as a predictor for where you felt the Kundalini moving in your body. And notably, let's see, so these are the sacrocranial harmonics we talked about. Yes, so this is the next graphic. So this is the acoustical standing waves in the ventricles. So here, remember I said Bentov set up a number of meditators, and his tune an audio oscillator and tell me what pitch, frequency you're hearing in your ringing in your ears. And these were the frequencies they measured in black, and I'm making the point here in red, the actual harmonics predicted by my equation, which in the lower frequencies predicts pretty well. So not only does the spine liquid pump harmonics and the heart harmonics and the ADP cellular harmonics fit golden ratio, implosion, and Planck, but most of the frequencies heard in the ringing in the ears of meditators fit that equation as well. So now this is where this was done here, this graphic was done with the help of Patrick Botti, who is our lead programmer for all our biofeedback apps. His website, craniosacral-app.com. And so this is where Patrick kindly mapped. You see on the left up top, you have the Schumann resonance harmonics of the planet. And note that they fit my equation here. These are the harmonics of my equation, golden ratio times Planck. And the Schumann harmonics in cycles per second, 7.29, 19.08, 30.88, fit rather surprisingly well on the Schumann harmonics cascade. And note that then we're going to see that fits the alpha, theta, delta, and beta brainwave harmonics, which we can see when we just talk about how you measure human bliss in the brainwaves, flameinmind.com. So for example, the alpha frequency around 7.28 to 8 hertz is actually alpha, the turning point in brainwave meditation, because it is the Schumann main harmonic of the earth. So basically when your brain radio entrains the earth radio, that's the definition of the beginning of bliss and the end of addiction. It's your body's ability to feel the Schumann caduceus. And so then Patrick has worked this out and he applied it to the sacrocranial harmonics, the breath harmonics, the brainwave harmonics, the Schumann harmonics. They all fit this cascade from my equation. So again, all of this information is at goldenmean.info/Kundalini. So here is just the example from the physics which we've gone through in the other films, from the basic equation that if you take Planck times powers of golden ratio, you get all of these important wavelengths from, on the bottom, 3 radii of hydrogen, ADP, we talked about adenosine diphosphate. You get the only 2 exact color optical frequencies which motorize photosynthesis, the purple and the orange. You get the British foot, the definition of sacred length. You get the Schumann harmonics, the brainwave harmonics, the Mayer wave harmonics. You get the Venus year, Earth year, galactic year, solar year, and precessional year. All are predicted, and so that's a line of implosion that creates negentropy. It's the origin of life itself. So, let's just think for a moment, have we talked enough about the physics of Kundalini to move into our next subject, and the next film which will be the experience and the hygiene. You see, in the next film we're going to talk about the effect that Kundalini has on your environment, the effect that Kundalini has on rainmaking, the effect that Kundalini has on people around you, the effect it has on steering tornadoes, the effect it has on the mineral to water bonds in your blood. And we're going to talk about the hygiene to create Kundalini. That in addition to the breath harmonics, you have dietary issues, you have grounding issues, you have hydration issues. There's many challenges to be able to support this lightning. So having this background is going to enable us to understand the intense dynamics. Remember, we're going to talk about how, for example, when Gopi Krishna wrote his book on Kundalini, and we knew him through Gene Ringe, Human Dimensions. I was in that generation. And when Krishnamurti had his Kundalini experience, most of their description of Kundalini experience is, oh my God, I'm burning up, I'm going to hell, stop, please, please stop. That's their response, actually. And yet, so Kundalini, at its climax point, can be life-threatening. And what we need to understand is the hygiene, the grounding, the hydration, to create a situation where you can withstand that much charge density in your body without it becoming threatening and painful.